Hi everyone, it's Kay from Kay's Creative Home. Today we're going to be making a beautiful wreath using this wreath form and then this green styrofoam wreath form. I'm going to be using that to fill the area in the back so I have something to stick my flowers into. And then I'm going to be using this lavender flowers from Silk Flowers. And then I have some greenery that I'll be using in the arrangement. I was going to use this amaranthus, but decided not to later on. And then I also have some lavender roses. All right, now let's get started. So to start today, I'm going to be splitting this wreath form in half. I thought I had a flat styrofoam wreath form, but I don't. So I'm going to take this one, split it in half, and use it to fill up the back of this wreath form, the wire wreath form. And you can see I've already done this with one. I just cut the circle down the middle, and then I cut it into pieces because it was actually too small for this wreath form. So I had to kind of separate it out so that it would make it around the curve. So I'm just going to place it in here this way, and it took still almost the whole wreath form, but not quite. So once I got that laid out in the wreath form, I took some hot glue and put it on the outer and the middle wires, and then just place the styrofoam back in there to kind of hold it in place. And when I'm completely finished the wreath, I'm going to put some backing on it to make sure everything stays in place. So I'm going to just work my way around here, and I'll be right back. So now that I have this styrofoam glued in place into the wreath form, the next thing I'm going to do is take my roses and begin cutting the stems. And I'm going to push the leaves up so I make sure I have the leaves attached to the rose buds. And then I'm going to cut the stem at about 3 to 4 inches. And I'm just going to work my way through this bunch and get them all snipped up. And then I will begin arranging them on the wreath form. So I start by first just laying them on top of this wreath form, trying to get a feel for how I want to arrange them. And I figure if I put one on the outer edge, one on the inner edge, and one down the center, I'll have enough greenery with the leaves and the rosebuds to actually fill in the wreath form, and I won't have to use more greenery in the background. So I just scoot it around to the side here so I can get a little closer so you can see. And I'm just going to add a little bit of hot glue to the tips of each stem and then stick it down into the styrofoam. And that will hold it in place solidly. It won't be coming out. And that's how I'm going to begin to make my arrangement around the wreath form. Now my goal is to go almost all the way around, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap so that I can change the very bottom of how the roses are going. But right now they're going to just go in one direction. You will notice as I'm kind of placing the roses, what I do first is kind of lay it where I want it to go and get an idea of where that stem is going to be. So once I kind of lay it where I need it to be, I kind of have to come up about 1 inch and then stick it into the foam so that once it's down in the foam, you know, about 1 inch, the rose will kind of slide down and be exactly in the place where I wanted it to be. So if you decide to make it, don't forget that where you start, you know, puncturing it into the form is not where that rose is going to stay. Once you push it in, your rose is going to sink in and be a little lower in place than you started. So I've made it through most of that first bunch, so I'm gonna start trimming up the second one. And I think in total I used I used a total of 4 bunches. So if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with others so that they can learn also how to make this wreath. And if you're not a family member, please consider becoming one by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the bell so you'll be notified as I release new videos. I have a couple Easter videos coming up next, and I think you'll enjoy them. One I do with a Easter egg design, and one I do with a cross design, which can be used throughout the year for burial plots. But I love it for Easter to have those lilies and things like that to remind us of the Easter season. All right, let's finish this up. So I've made my way around the wreath form, and I still have a few roses left on that last bush. And you can see how I've come all the way down to almost meet, but I didn't meet exactly because now I'm going to kind of curve the direction of the roses. I did end up with a few gaps, and I'm pointing to one. And I went back and filled those in. I think I had 2 or 3 where I had to go back and fill them in with a rose. So I did pretty good with filling it in, just, working my way around. But, at the end you still need to check. So now when I cut these roses, I'm going to cut a real long stem, almost as long as I can actually get off of this bunch, because these are going to be hanging down in a downward direction. And I'm going to need as much stem as possible to make them as long as possible. So my next step will be to kind of lay them in place where I think I want them to go, because I'm kind of figuring this out as I go along. So I am putting them in position, and then once I get them exactly where I want them, get those stems at the right length so they won't be sticking through on the other side. And you see right now I glued that, put some hot glue on that one so that I can put it in permanently. And then once I, get them laid out kind of like I want them, I'll glue them in and be ready to move to the next step. But it took me a minute to kind of get them how I wanted them. You see I'm kind of looking at it and eyeing it, trying to decide, is this right? Is this going to end up the way I want it to go? And sometimes you got to do that. I'm not a expert at this. I haven't been doing this for as long as others, but I'm learning, and I know how to put something together and take it back apart if I need to so that I can get it right. So I'm learning as I go, but I'm kind of getting this figured out. I kind of like the way this is starting to shape up. So I'm going to trim these stems down and get these roses where I want them, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next thing. So my next step was to begin adding in some of this greenery, and I'm also putting this in a downward direction. And I think this was the most difficult part because, when you start sticking these stems in here, sometimes it just looks like a bunch of stems stuck in an arrangement. But as you keep going and keep filling it in, it comes together. So you got to just keep your eye on where you're heading and not look at what it is right now. Because if you keep filling it in, it's going to be looking better and better. So I'm going to just keep adding my little glue to the tips and adding them in until I get the look that I like. So I'm going to continue working on this, and don't forget that if you're not already a family member, you can hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be notified as I release new videos. I also have in the description box below a link to some other wreaths I've made for the spring, and I also have a link to a series I did on how to make a bow, because a lot of wreaths include bows, and so if you have any difficulty making those, you can check out some of those videos in that playlist. Okay, so we're going to keep adding these in until I get it nice and full, and then we'll see what comes next. So it was a little difficult getting some of those stems to go in because the roses were kind of crossing them in the styrofoam. So I decided to flip it over and actually glue some of these stems right to the back. And to make sure they were secure, I took a piece of pipe cleaner and twisted it around the stem and the edge of the wreath form so they would stay in place. And so you can see I've added in quite a few. I'm laying them down, hot gluing them, holding them in place, and then adding a little bit of the pipe cleaner to secure them. Alright, so now I have that greenery added and it's looking nice and full like I want it. And my next step will be to add some lavender into this arrangement. And I chose this because it had the length, so it'll help the bottom area. It'll help to fill in that bottom area I added. And then it also has lavender and white, so it'll kind of brighten up the arrangement and kind of break up that lavender color. So what I'm going to do is trim these. I think I left about an inch or two, probably about 2 inches at the bottom of these stems. And I'm going to add some to the bottom, in between that greenery, just gluing it in so it's secure. And then I'm going to also add some into the circle part of the wreath to brighten it up throughout. So let's get that done and I'll be right back. So I filled in that bottom part that hangs down, and now I'm just kind of placing them into the circular part of the wreath. And right now I'm placing them just to decide where I want them to go, but I promise I do go back and glue them in so that they're secure and they won't be falling out. Okay, I'm going to finish this up and then I'm going to share some pictures of how it turned out so you can kind of see it's upright, because it's hard to imagine the whole thing when it's laid out on the table like this. So I really just appreciate you sharing this time with me. And let me say it the way I usually say it. I just want to thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll be talking with you again real soon.